I call the member for Clark.
And I thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, minimising secrecy and maximising transparency are obviously building blocks of a healthy democracy and are to be applauded. So this is a worthwhile bill and it's obviously supportable. It's supportable not just because of what it does, but also because of the way it reminds us of what the government isn't doing, which is why I moved the amendment circulated in my name, and it's very brief, Deputy Speaker, so I'll read it out, that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting the following words. Whilst not declining to give the bill a second reading, the House 1 notes that Australia has been described as the most secretive democracy in the world due to the proliferation of national security, counter-terrorism and secrecy laws and the lack of whistleblower and public interest journalism protections. And B, despite the Labor Party promising in its 2021 platform to overhaul and improve Australia's whistleblower protections, only small changes have been introduced to date and protections remain patchwork and inadequate. And 2, calls on the government to introduce comprehensive reforms to the Public Interest Disclosure Act and the Corporations Act to better protect whistleblowers. B, introduce comprehensive reforms to the Crimes Act and Criminal Code and Evidence Act to better protect public interest journalism and media sources. C, establish a whistleblower protection authority to oversee public and private sector whistleblowing. And D, establish a federal whistleblower reward scheme encouraging whistleblowers to come forward and expose wrongdoing. Deputy Speaker, I pursue this matter at this time because, frankly, whistleblowers matter. They're one of the most fundamental building blocks of our democracy and one of the fundamental ways that we bring genuine transparency to the way this country is run. Deputy Speaker, where would we be? Where would we be without someone like Tony Hoffman, who you'd recall was the nurse at Bundaberg Hospital who blew the whistle on Dr Patel and the tragic death that occurred there over a period of years? Where would we be without Alan Kessing? He was the Sydney Airport Customs Officer who blew the whistle on the security lapses at Sydney Airport. Where would we be without Jeff Morris? He blew the whistle on misconduct at CommBank and the incompetence in ASIC and was one of the reasons we ended up having a Royal Commission into the financial services sector. Where would we be without Richard Boyle? He blew the whistle on the egregious conduct at the Australian Tax Office in Adelaide. David McBride, who blew the whistle and provided the evidence of war crimes in Afghanistan. And in my own work, Deputy Speaker, there's been a number of whistleblowers that I've helped facilitate the disclosure of their information. Deputy Speaker, you might remember the information that was revealed about Crown Casino. And I'm mindful of the Crown whistleblower who provided me with the video footage of a group of young men in a private gaming room laundering literally an Aldi freezer bag full of cash, which was estimated to contain about $2 million, all because of a whistleblower. Troy Stoltz, the former Clubs New South Wales compliance officer, who provided the evidence of non-compliance at up to 95% of money laundering and counter-terrorism legislation in registered clubs in New South Wales. What about the AFL whistleblower, the doctor for Melbourne, who revealed the evidence of secret drug testing within the AFL? Where would we be without the very brave whistleblower about the Hillsong Church, who provided, and I think it was in this chamber, on her behalf, I tabled something like 17 folders of hard evidence of shocking financial misconduct by the leadership of the Hillsong Church. Deputy Speaker, these people should be celebrated, but instead they're ridiculed, persecuted, charged, jailed. Just look at those examples I've given you. Tony Hoffman was undermined and ridiculed. Alan Kessing was charged and convicted. Jeff Morris, the bank whistleblower, was sacked by the bank. Richard Boyle from the ATO, he was charged and mercifully there was no conviction recorded. David McBride, of course, is in jail only several kilometres from here where we meet today. Troy Stoltz, he was taken to court by Clubs New South Wales. The AFL whistleblower, ridiculed within the AFL and beyond. And the Hillsong whistleblower. That whistleblower is before the court as we speak, and in fact there's an AAP story circulating today about what's going on there. In other words, Deputy Speaker, the protections just don't work for these people, whether they be in the public sector and are relying or leaning on the Public Interest Disclosure Act, or in the private sector, perhaps relying on the relevant sections of the Corporations Act. They're just not working. And there was, in fact, this is very timely, Deputy Speaker. There's no better evidence of this than the report in the Australian Financial Review just 3 days ago on the May 10th regarding Neo Metals executive Christian Riker, who thought he was a whistleblower when he flagged governance and strategic risks at the battery technology company. In fact, I met with Christian Riker about a year ago, and from memory, one of the issues was an allegation of theft of intellectual property when it came to whatever Neo Metals was pursuing. But in a and I'll read this from the Fin Review so I'll get it right, please, Deputy Speaker. In a major judgment, the federal court has backed the company's decision to make Riker redundant, finding that because the board and CEO subjectively believed Riker's complaints were unfounded, or that it was simply part of his job to raise such matters, that because of that, he was not protected by the whistleblower laws. Now, if those who are listening to me are struggling to understand what I just said, I don't understand it myself. I think, in other words, this whistleblower is witness to serious misconduct. He speaks up. He thinks he has the protection of the relevant part of the Corporations Act, but because the management didn't regard him as a whistleblower, then he's not protected by the whistleblower protections. Now, that's not a criticism of the court in any way, Deputy Speaker, because the court entirely appropriately applied the law as it stands. The issue is that the law's a crock. In fact, isn't it interesting that there has not been one successful whistleblower in a compensation claim under both the federal public sector and the private sector whistleblower laws. Not one successful claim for financial compensation under any of those laws since they've existed. Surely that is all the evidence we need, Deputy Speaker, that they need to be improved. Now, I'm delighted to see the Attorney-General in the Federation Chamber, and I do note that the government has been working on reform for some time. In fact, for at least the last 4 years, the Labor government has been talking about reform, have acknowledged the need for reform. Consultations have come and gone. Consultations are forthcoming, I think, on the Corporations Act. But, we measure success by outcomes. And the Public Interest Disclosure Act has not been amended in any substantive way except for a few technical changes, dotted a few I's, crossed a few T's. There hasn't been the deep reform of the Public Interest Disclosure Act that is needed. And the Corporations Act, I don't think that's been touched ever since Senator Rex Patrick did fabulous work in the Senate some years ago to get those provisions put into the Corporations Act. So, Deputy Speaker, through you, I say to the Attorney-General, we've really got to get cracking on this. We've really got to get cracking on this. And not just the PID, but the Corporations Act as well. I mean, I just find this unfathomable that Christian Riker was witness to misconduct, and I've spoken to this man personally. I am satisfied that he was witness to misconduct. But because the management at Neo Metals didn't regard him as a whistleblower, they thought it was just part of his normal job to observe things like intellectual property theft, that the relevant part of the Corporations Act doesn't apply. I think that's a very, very timely example that I'm able to bring to the Attorney-General's attention through you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, of course, it's not just amending those acts. There is also the pressing need for an independent whistleblower protection authority, like exists in a number of countries around the world. Because the fact is that whistleblowing in this country is diabolically difficult. It's incredibly difficult. For a start, you've got to For a start, you've got to be able to safely collect the evidence of your complaint. And we saw with Richard Boyle, the ATO whistleblower, that although I think from memory the court understood he was a whistleblower, they found he wasn't protected by the relevant Act because his collection of evidence was not covered by the Act. Well, how can you blow the whistle if you can't collect the evidence? So, the legislation is complex, and frankly, unless you're a lawyer in this area, or unless you can go to something like an independent whistleblower authority to get advice, then you're behind the game right from the start. There's such a high likelihood that you're going to stumble and fall foul of the law, just like Richard Boyle did. Fortunately, there was no conviction recorded against Richard Boyle in the end. And then, apart from just understanding the law, just someone to mentor you through the process. Because, take the Public Interest Disclosure Act. There is a convoluted process, a series of hoops you have to jump through. And you need someone to sort of figuratively hold your hand and guide you through all of those hoops. Otherwise, you will be run foul of the law. So that's something I think that we need to turn our mind to, Deputy Speaker. It's come up from time to time in public utterances by the government. It exists in a number of other countries, and it's something that would be very, very worthwhile. Deputy Speaker, I won't detain the House any longer. I would just say, in closing, yes, minimising secrecy and maximising transparency are building blocks of a healthy democracy and are to be applauded. So I say through you to the Attorney-General, this is a worthwhile bill, and I would hope it has the unanimous support of everyone in this House and in the other place. But it's almost a clarion call to get moving on all the other stuff, the big stuff, the more important stuff, the more helpful stuff, the stuff that will show whether or not this government has real integrity and it really is committed to minimising secrecy and maximising transparency, and to celebrate the people who speak up and speak truth to power. And by the way, I rattled off about 10 examples there of particular individuals. We should also be mindful of the thousands of Australians who speak up in all sorts of ways, whether it be about the organisation they're a member of, the business they're an employee of, maybe about their local council, any number of things where people speak up. And for many of those whistleblowers, it ends in tears. They will be bullied in the workplace, they'll be managed out, or they'll be just blatantly sacked. They will be ridiculed, marginalised. It leads to financial troubles. It leads to relationship troubles. No wonder the suicide rate for whistleblowers is markedly higher than the baseline rate in our community. Whistleblowing in this country is almost impossibly difficult. And, I'm pleased people like Tony Hoffman, Alan Kessing, Jeff Morris, Richard Boyle, David McBride, Troy Stoltz, I'm pleased they have enjoyed the publicity and the public support they have. But spare a thought for the thousands of other Australians who speak up and the local paper won't even give them the time of day, let alone having a story on the news that night, let alone capturing the attention of the media for a protracted period of time to really make the case and to really sort of sandbag their position and be in a stronger position publicly. In closing, Deputy Speaker, I'll just say, while all of the hullabaloo caused by whistleblowers might well be a bugbear for organisations, they are nonetheless grist to the mill of Australia's democracy, and they must be supported and indeed celebrated and not be the tall poppies that some people make them out to be. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.